Ireland is officially one of the richest countries on earth, with an average income of nearly $79,000 per person. But walk through Dublin, and you'll find a housing crisis so severe that young professionals are living in shared rooms well into their 30s. Something doesn't add up. Today, we're going to uncover why Ireland looks insanely wealthy on paper, but feels completely different for people actually living there. You'll learn how multinational corporations created a fake economy, why standard economic measurements completely fail in Ireland, and most importantly, who's actually getting rich from all this. By the end, you'll understand one of the strangest economic paradoxes in the developed world. The numbers don't lie, or do they? Let's start with those mind-blowing statistics. In 2023, Ireland's gross national income per capita hit $78,970. That's higher than the United States, higher than Germany, higher than nearly every country on the planet. But here's the thing. This number is essentially fiction. To understand why, we need to talk about how we measure economies. Most people have heard of GDP, gross domestic product. It measures everything produced inside a country's borders. Then there's GNI, gross national income, which measures the income actually earned by a country's residents. But Ireland had to invent an entirely new measurement because even GNI was telling a massively distorted story. The Leprechaun Economics moment, in 2015. Something absolutely bizarre happened. Ireland's official GDP suddenly jumped by 26.3% in a single year. 26%. For context, that's the kind of growth you'd expect from a developing country discovering oil, not a mature European economy. Except Ireland didn't discover oil. They didn't invent some revolutionary technology. What happened was that a few multinational companies, likely including Apple, moved their intellectual property assets to Ireland on paper. Suddenly, all those patents and copyrights were Irish, at least according to the paperwork. Economists started calling it Leprechaun Economics. The wealth was magical. It appeared in the statistics but vanished when you tried to spend it. Enter GNI star, Ireland's reality check. This embarrassment forced Irish statisticians to create something called Modified GNI, pronounced GNI star. Think of it as an economic reality filter. GNI removes three massive distortions. First, it subtracts depreciation on intellectual property, those patents and copyrights that exist in Ireland only on paper. Second, it removes depreciation on leased aircraft, because Ireland hosts a huge aircraft leasing industry that's similarly detached from the real economy. Third, it removes profits from companies that move their headquarters to Ireland but don't actually operate there. When you apply this filter, nearly 45% of Ireland's economy disappears, and that's the official government measurement admitting this. In 2023, GNI asterisk was only about 55 to 57% of GDP. Imagine if half your paycheck was promised to you but never actually deposited in your account. That's essentially what's happening to Ireland as a country. How did this happen? The corporate tax paradise strategy. Ireland didn't stumble into this situation, they engineered it deliberately over decades. It started in 1980, when Ireland offered a 10% tax rate to manufacturing companies. This was revolutionary at the time. Companies like Microsoft and Dell rushed in, and manufacturing output increased fivefold. Then in 2003, Ireland standardized their corporate tax rate at 12.5%, the second lowest in the entire European Union. But the real magic wasn't just the low rate. Ireland created a sophisticated system of tax advantages, specifically designed for intellectual property. They offer a 30% credit on research and development spending, which effectively becomes a 42.5% deduction when combined with other tax breaks. They created something called the Knowledge Development Box, which taxes profits from patents and software at an effective rate of just 10% for tech and pharma giants. Ireland became the perfect place to park their most valuable asset, not factories or offices, but intellectual property rights worth billions. Think about it this way. If you're Apple and you've developed the iPhone, where do you assign ownership of that invention for tax purposes? You put it in Ireland? Then every iPhone sold worldwide generates profit that flows through Ireland's low tax system before heading back to shareholders in the US. The two-sector economy, tech giants versus and everyone else. This strategy created a bizarre dual economy. In 2022, foreign-owned corporations contributed 61% of Ireland's entire GDP. These companies generated 71% of total business turnover. But here's the shocking part. These foreign corporations represent only 3.2% of all Irish businesses and employ just 27% of Irish workers. Let that sink in. Less than 1 in 30 businesses employing barely a quarter of workers, generates nearly 3/4 of the country's economic output. This is the hallmark of an economy driven by accounting magic, rather than actual productivity. Ireland has become really good at hosting spreadsheets that say, "This patent belongs here," not necessarily at making things or providing services. The two industries driving this: pharmaceuticals accounted for 37% of goods exports, and tech services accounted for 47% of service exports, and most of that value just passes through Ireland without touching Irish lives. Companies like Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Pfizer, and 16 of the world's top 20 tech companies have major operations in Ireland. But operations often means a few hundred highly paid employees, managing billions in intellectual property. Not massive factories employing thousands. If you're finding this fascinating, hit that like button. It helps more people discover how global economics actually works behind the scenes. The global tax game is changing for decades. Ireland's competitive advantage was simple: we'll tax your profits less than anyone else. But that game is ending. In 2023, Ireland implemented a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15%, part of an OECD agreement signed by over 135 countries. If a company's effective tax rate in Ireland falls below 15% through deductions and credits, top-up taxes now apply to bring it to the minimum. This changes everything. Ireland can no longer compete purely on having the lowest rate. Now they have to compete on substance, quality of workforce, political stability, and access to the European Union's 500 million consumers. The short-term effect: Ireland will actually collect more tax revenue from companies that were previously paying below 15%. But long-term, the big question is, will these companies stay when the tax advantage shrinks? So, who actually gets rich? Now we get to the critical question. If all this wealth is flowing through Ireland, who's actually benefiting? First, the multinational shareholders, mostly American investors, who get to keep more of their profits through tax efficiency. Second, the Irish government, which collected 18 billion in corporate taxes in 2022. That's substantial, but it's also incredibly risky, because it's concentrated in a handful of companies that could restructure at any time. Third, the employees of multinationals, who earn an average of 73,800 euros. Annually, that's 38% above the national average. If you're a software engineer at Google's Dublin office, or a biochemist at Pfizer's Cork facility, you're doing very well. But here's the cruel twist: those high salaries are directly destroying wealth for everyone else. The housing crisis feedback loop. All those high-earning tech and pharma workers need places to live. They're competing for housing in a market where Ireland is building only 32,000 units per year but needs 45,000 to 50,000. Property values near multinational campuses have grown 14% higher than comparable areas. Housing assets in Ireland are now worth 812 billion, more than half of all household wealth. So, who's truly rich in Ireland? Existing homeowners. The wealthiest 10% of Irish households own 49.1% of all wealth in the country, and most of that wealth is locked up in property that keeps getting more expensive. Young people, renters, and anyone trying to buy their first home are locked out. The multinational economy creates high-paying jobs, which drives up housing costs, which creates wealth for people who already own property, which makes it harder for the next generation to build wealth. It's a vicious cycle, where the rich Ireland statistics are simultaneously true and completely irrelevant to most Irish people's lives. What Ireland actually looks like. When you account for taxes and transfers, Ireland's income inequality isn't terrible. The Gini coefficient, measure of inequality, sits at 26.9% for disposable income, which is relatively equal by global standards. The government uses those corporate tax revenues to fund social programs that redistribute income effectively. But wealth inequality is severe and getting worse. Income gets redistributed. Property values don't. The poorest 20% of Irish people receive about 9.7% of disposable income, while the richest 20% get 36.6%. That's not great, but it's manageable. But for wealth, the top 10% own nearly half of everything. And unless you bought property years ago or work for a multinational, you're probably not in that group. So here's the truth about Ireland's wealth. It's real, but it's not Irish. The statistics reflect an economy purpose-built to attract global corporations through tax advantages and EU market access. Those corporations generate enormous paper wealth that flows through Ireland's accounts before leaving again. What remains? The wages, the taxes, the housing demand creates a divided society, where genuine prosperity is limited to those already owning assets or working in the charmed circle of multinationals. as the global tax regime shifts to 15% minimums. Ireland must transition from being a tax haven to being a genuinely attractive place for substantive business operations. Whether they can solve the housing crisis and spread prosperity more broadly will determine if Ireland's economic miracle becomes an actual miracle for Irish people, or remains a statistical illusion. If this video changed how you think about economic statistics, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into how the global economy actually works. And here's my question for you. Does your country have any similar fake wealth that looks good on paper but doesn't match reality? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and the best answers might inspire future videos. See you in the next one.